Welcome back to another episode from Barking Bond's lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? We'd love to know. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's dive into today's gripping story. If you've ever been in a place where the wind itself seems to carry secrets, you'd understand Ash Hollow. It was the kind of town where the past didn't just linger. It crouched in the corners, watching. On that particular morning, two young sisters were out there balancing along the rusted rails like tightrope walkers in a faded carnival. They weren't playing. They were hunting, scavenging for whatever scraps could keep their family from going hungry one more night. Their breath came in little clouds, puffing out into the sharp autumn air, each exhale proof of how cold it was. Shiloh padded ahead of them, his big, dust-streaked paws clicking softly on the warped wooden ties. He was more than a dog. He was their shadow, their compass, their protector. That morning, his head dipped low, ears snapping forward in unison, nose twitching like it had caught the edge of something dangerous. A scent, a warning. Then it came. A sound that would carve itself into the girl's memories forever. First, a faint, muffled cry. Then the far-off rumble of a train working its way along the line. The sisters froze for only a heartbeat before scrambling forward. What they found lying on the cold steel was not just another stranger in trouble. This was a man tied tight from wrists to ankles, eyes and mouth smothered under dark cloth, his life dangling by seconds. It wasn't simply a rescue waiting to happen. It was a story hidden beneath soot and silence, one that would split open the long drought of mercy in their forgotten town. It was a tale of sisters and secrets, of miracles that arrive when no one's looking. Before we go on, think about this. Do you know someone who'd walk straight into danger beside their dog? If you do, speak their name aloud. Let's honor those quiet, unseen heroes. And if you believe even the smallest voices deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button, because this story might just remind you that sometimes angels don't have wings. Sometimes they come with paws. The air in Ash Hollow that morning was heavy with the sharp bite of late October, the sort of cold that clings to the cuffs of your jeans and seeps through thin socks. A pale sun tried to push its way through a sheet of weak, milky clouds, spilling a faded gold light across the crumbling hills of West Virginia. Once, this had been a proud coal town buzzing with work and noise. Now, the silence here had a weight to it. Freight trains cut through without stopping, the wind rattled loose tin, and the only voices were those carried in echoes. June and Joni Keene, 11-year-old twins with matching faces but not matching tempers, moved quietly along the bent rails on the outskirts. Their skin was sun-roughened, their clothes second-hand and worn, the sort of wear that comes from living more outside than in. June, the more careful of the two, had her dark brown hair in two neat braids tucked under, an olive green beanie, a size too big jacket hugging her narrow frame. She had the stillness of a thinker, the kind of person who notices what others miss. Joni, a hair taller and much quicker to act, was always in motion, fingers twitching at bottle caps, pulling threads loose from her coat hem, searching the ground for anything worth keeping. Her hair was in matching braids too, though hers were already half unraveled from her restless steps. She spoke fast, thought faster, and knew how to wedge her way into conversations before grown-ups could shut the door. Shiloh stayed ahead, limping, faintly on his back left leg, a wound no one had been able to pay to fix. His coat, once rich sable, was dulled by years of sun and dust. He had belonged to their mother Maggie long before sickness took her lungs and kept her mostly indoors. When she could no longer walk far, she'd given Shiloh over to the girls, though in truth, he had always been theirs. Scarred but steady, He was a sentinel who asked for nothing but stayed through everything. Behind them, the town was only beginning to stir. Inside their two-room house, an old miner's cabin leaning into its last years, Maggie Keene sat by the window in her worn chair, the light just catching the thinning black hair around her temples. She had once been tall and strong, but now her body seemed to fold under an invisible weight. A heavy cardigan and fingerless gloves kept her working despite the cold. A half-finished piece of embroidery stretched in her lap. Every few minutes, a dry cough tore through her, but she pushed the needle through the fabric anyway. The little floral hoops she sold at the flea market didn't fetch much, but they kept the girls from begging. Back on the rails, June crouched. To clear away some gravel, her eyes catching the shine of a copper pipe under a blanket of brittle leaves. Copper meant more than a handful of tin cans, maybe enough for bread. Joni circled back to help, but Shiloh's sudden stillness stopped them both. One paw lifted, nose twitching. A low, uneasy whine slipped from his throat before he bolted forward, ears flattened tight. "What's he doing?" Joni called, already moving. June let the pipe drop. Something was wrong. They chased after him, boots crunching over stones until the tracks curved around a short embankment. And there he was, a man stretched across the rails, wrists and ankles bound, head lolling forward, blindfolded and gagged. Joni's gasp broke the quiet. "Oh, God!" Shiloh circled the man once, barked, then barked again, sharper, more urgent. "Don't just stand there!" June snapped. "Help me!" They dropped to their knees, clawing at the ropes. His uniform was smeared with dirt and blood, but the badge glinting faintly at his chest said everything. Deputy Elias Rowe. "He's alive, I think," Joni said, working the knots at his ankles. June tore the gag from his mouth. Elias groaned, the sound scraping like gravel in his throat. His face was pale under the bruises blooming along his jaw, his body heavy and limp. The hum of the tracks deepened. Shiloh's head swung toward the horizon. Joni's voice trembled. "June! The train!" "I know." They worked frantically, rope biting their fingers raw. "Pull his legs!" June shouted. Joni heaved. Elias moaned, but didn't fight them. The horn wailed in the distance. Low, urgent, closing in fast. Less than a minute. "Shiloh, come on!" June called. The shepherd lunged in, teeth gripping the man's shoulder without breaking skin, pulling. With a growl, together they dragged him over the first rail, then the second. 30 seconds. They fell back, gasping, as the train exploded past in a rush of steel and wind, the sound tearing through the air like a scream. Elias's eyes fluttered open. "What? What?" "You're safe," June panted. "We got you. Out!" Joni's hands trembled, palms raw and cut. She looked at Shiloh. "You saved him, boy." Shiloh licked her wrist once and lay down beside Elias, steady despite his panting. Elias Rowe awoke later in a room filled with dusty gold light. Though illness had made her appear gaunt. Her dark brown hair, once thick, was tied in a loose knot, and a gray streak ran through one side. Her skin was pale from time indoors, her cheekbones prominent. Once an electrician for a local firm, she'd fallen from a scaffold 2 years ago, shattering her collarbone and bruising a lung. The pain had never really left, and neither had the cough that followed. "You're the man my girls pulled off the tracks," she said, her voice but steady. "I am," Elias said, removing his cap. "And I'm alive because of them." Joni peeked from behind the hallway curtain. Her eyes were wide, but her grin grew crooked and sure when she saw him. "You don't look dead anymore. I don't feel dead anymore." Shiloh padded into the room and stood beside him, tail wagging once before sitting like a statue at his side. Elias crouched stiffly and scratched behind his ear. "You again, hero?" Maggie set her needle down. "We didn't expect a visit." Elias hesitated. "I didn't come empty-handed." He stepped back toward the door and returned with a paper sack. From the clinic, some food supplies, soup, beans, fruit, first aid things, and a voucher for Maggie's checkup at the free clinic downtown. Maggie stiffened. "We didn't ask for charity." "No," he said softly. "You earned help, and I'm not giving you charity. I'm repaying a debt." There was silence. Then Maggie's shoulders slumped slightly. "All right, but you'll have dinner before you go. I've got potatoes and eggs." That evening, over boiled eggs, onion-fried potatoes, and weak tea, Elias learned more than he had in 5 years of patrol. About how Joni once fell from the water tower chasing a bottle cap. About June's habit of mapping out every trash route and resale bin in town. About how Shiloh had been born under Maggie's bed during the last winter when they still had heating oil. Afterward, as the girls cleared the dishes, Elias leaned closer to Maggie. "What they did, it wasn't just brave, it was right. But I can't ignore what it means." Maggie nodded, already knowing. "Someone wanted you gone." "Yes," he said, "I've dealt with criminals, even scumbags. But this, they didn't want to rob me. They wanted silence." He paused, voice lowered. "I'm reporting it to the FBI. I think it's connected to those missing girls." Maggie looked toward the hallway where Joni was now helping June fold a cloth napkin into a triangle. "Do what you have to," she said, "but don't bring the fight to my doorstep." "I won't," he promised. That night, Joni sat on her thin mattress beneath the window where frost had started to bloom at the corners. She pulled out her journal, just a bundle of sewn paper scraps, and sharpened her stub of pencil on the rough wood of the window frame. In tight cursive, she wrote, "He came back today. He didn't look like a hero or a ghost, just a man who didn't expect someone to care." Down the hall, June sat beside their mother's bed, holding the embroidery in her lap. She threaded the needle with slow precision and began to stitch a shape. Shiloh, standing tall beside 2 girls holding hands. She didn't speak, but her smile was soft, and it stayed. The wind along the old rail path had turned sharp by early November, slicing through the coats of anyone not layered in wool or worn denim. Ash Hollow was settling deeper into its rust-brown hush. The trees now stripped bare, their skeletal branches rattling softly in the cold breeze. The sky hung low and gray like a warning no one could read properly, and the silence in the woods grew heavier with every day. Joni Keene squatted at the base of an iron post where the tracks forked, her mittened hands working to pry something from, beneath a pile of rusted nails and broken glass. June stood a few feet away, eyes sweeping the gravel, Shiloh padding behind her with slow, sniffing steps. They hadn't expected to find anything worthwhile this far out. This section of the line hadn't carried trains in years, but their mother's cough had been worse that morning, and desperation had a way of pushing them beyond old boundaries. The object Joni uncovered wasn't scrap metal. It was Asmal wooden box, maybe the size of a shoebox, banded with brass corners, and stained so dark with age it almost blended into the earth. The hinges were rusted shut. She turned it in her hands. "You think it's worth anything?" June tilted her head. "Looks too rotted to be worth much. Still, someone left it out there for a reason," Joni finished. "They brought it home in the burlap sack they used for collecting cans, thinking maybe it had hidden coins or old tools inside. But it wasn't until that evening when Elias stopped by to drop off canned milk and a spare flashlight that the box revealed its true weight. Elias had just placed the supplies on the kitchen counter when he spotted the box sitting on the floor near Joni's coat, his gaze fixed instantly. "Where did you find that?" he asked, walking over with slow purpose. "Near the split track," Joni said, chewing her thumbnail. It was half buried. Elias crouched, fingers brushing the worn insignia on the lid. A faded crest of a pickaxe crossed with a flame. He exhaled through his nose. Red Pine Company. June narrowed her eyes. "That's the mining place, right? The one that closed down?" "Yes." 20 years ago, Elias said, after a federal investigation into forced labor and illegal confinement, but most of the case files were sealed. And this? He ran a thumb along the brass band. This mark wasn't on any of the public company logos. This is internal. Maggie, listening from the recliner, spoke up between coughs. That box gives me a bad feeling. Inside, under layers of crumbling paper and a rag soaked in what smelled like old machine oil, was a folded parchment. Elias unfolded it carefully, revealing a hand-drawn map, sections labeled with faded notations, tunnels marked in red ink, and one symbol repeated several times, a triangle inside a circle. Joni leaned over his shoulder. "What's that symbol mean?" "I don't know," Elias admitted, "but I'll find out." The next morning, Elias drove into Charleston to meet with a contact from the State Bureau. Before leaving, he handed Maggie a number to call if anyone suspicious came around. He also gave June and Joni a simple instruction. "If anyone asks about that box, you never saw it. Understood?" Both girls nodded. While Elias was gone, Joni walked to school with a nod in her chest. In her backpack, tucked between textbooks and her sack lunch, was a printout their teacher had handed out the week before. Photos of missing children collected by state investigators for Awareness Week. Miss Delaney, their librarian and one of the few adults Joni respected unconditionally, had distributed them carefully. Delaney was 32, tall and graceful, with a crown of auburn hair tied back into a single twist, and round glasses always sliding down her nose. Her voice was soft but clear, and she'd a quiet way of making students feel like their silence still spoke. Volumes. Joni stared at one of the photos more than the others. The girl in the picture was about 17 with long, tangled hair, deep-set eyes, and a crooked smile. Her name was listed as Ruby Keene. Same last name, though Joni knew that didn't mean much in a town full of scattered kin. Still, something about the eyes, the way the girl looked like she was holding back laughter or pain or both, stuck with her. That night, Joni snuck into the back corner of their bedroom where Maggie kept her old metal cookie tin. She cracked it open with a butter knife. Inside were folded receipts, scraps of paper, and near the bottom a letter never sent. "Dear Ruby, I know they say it's foolish to write you, but I have to. Your sisters ask about you now and then, more in the quiet." Then aloud, "I tell them you were bright. You like shiny things. You braided my hair better than I could ever do yours. I remember the way you used to hum when you thought no one was listening. I pray you're still humming somewhere." Joni read the note twice, then found a photo behind it, slightly faded, taken before Joni and June were born. In it stood a young girl, maybe 7, hugging a woman with familiar eyes. Ruby. Joni placed the letter and photo back in the tin, slid it under the floorboard again, and didn't say a word to June. Not yet. Meanwhile, Elias returned from Charleston with a tense jaw and sharper eyes. At the FBI field office, his contact had recognized the symbol, a holding marker used during pre-transfer operations for undocumented trafficking victims. The site on the map aligned with a now defunct red pine shaft, officially sealed, but never formally demolished. He stood outside the Keene home that evening, watching the girls peel potatoes by the window. Shiloh curled up under the porch. He knew he had to go back to that mine, not with just a flashlight this time, but with permission, backup, and answers. But first, he had to find out if the girl named Ruby was more than just another name on a poster. The wind and Ash Hollow had turned bitter. Winter whispered through the cracks in the window frames, curled beneath doors, and carried with it a weight that settled not just on shoulders, but in the bones. Snow hadn't yet arrived, but the earth had hardened. Everything felt on edge, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Elias Rose stood at the mouth of the abandoned red pine shaft. To an outsider, it looked like nothing more than a collapsed structure. Boards nailed haphazardly across a dark void, nature reclaiming what industry had long since forgotten. But Elias wasn't just any outsider. He had seen too much, and he'd been silent once before. Now he would not be silent again. He adjusted the collar of his weathered brown coat, the wool lining pressed against his neck, and glanced toward the agents flanking him. The lead among them was Special Agent Mara Whitaker, early 40s, black with sharp cheekbones and an unblinking gaze that made most men stumble over their words. Her voice, however, was measured, professional, and strangely reassuring. She wore black tactical fleece under a Kevlar vest, and her dark braids were pulled back in a tight bun beneath her cap. "Your report said the structure's unstable," she said, eyes sweeping the overgrown entrance. "It is," Elias replied, crouching. "But there's a second access point. My dog found it 2 days ago." Shiloh padded forward on command. 8 years old, sable fur dusted with silver around the snout, but as sharp as any active canine Elias had worked with in his earlier days. His ears flicked forward, nose to the wind, tail steady. With a loud chuff, he moved toward the slope of rock to the left and began nosing along the edge. Mara raised a brow. "You trust him to find an entry?" "I trust him with my life." Minutes later, Shiloh let out a single sharp bark. They followed him to what looked like a collapsed drainage tunnel. Under the brush, a rusted steel grate had been pried open. Recently, the air from within was cold and metallic with a dampness that hinted at something worse than forgotten water. Elias crouched and shone his flashlight. The tunnel sloped downward steeply, then veered out of sight. "This wasn't just an accident site," Elias said. "Someone's been using this path." Mara signaled to her team, speaking into her radio with clipped precision. "Prep the layout. We need everything. Thermal drones if we can fly them in a sweep dog." She turned back to Elias. "Now tell me more about this Caleb Dorn." Elias's jaw clenched. "Caleb was sheriff here for 20 years, retired 5 years ago. The department called it early pension. I called it pressure. I filed reports. Misuse of funds, witness tampering, coercion of minors, but the town was small. Their record's even smaller. My case didn't stick." Mara nodded. "What makes you sure he's involved now?" "I wasn't supposed to. Survived that abduction. He made sure it was personal. He was the only one who could have leaked the route of my investigation. Hell, he probably ordered it. The way I was left tied, that washes signature." Elias paused. "He has a history of using back channels, old connections. Someone like him wouldn't disappear. He'd go deeper underground." Mara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned to her team and motioned toward the map Elias had sketched, annotated over the original with red ink and arrows. The plan was clear. Entry through the auxiliary tunnel, minimal movement to avoid cave-ins, and precise execution. Shiloh would lead. No alarms, no gunfire unless absolutely necessary. Lives could be held captive inside. That night, while agents prepared silencers and checked comms, another kind of stillness settled over the Keene household. Inside the tiny home, lit by a single oil lamp, Maggie sat at the wooden table with June and Joni. The girls were cutting shapes from flattened soda cans, edges filed down, strings threaded through punched holes to make decorative hooks. Their fingers were raw, bandaged in spots, but they smiled as Maggie hummed. She was 36, though worry and illness had aged her 10 years beyond. Her dark brown hair, once glossy, had lost its luster. Still, her hands moved with gentle grace, and her eyes tired. Yes, but still burning with love. Watched her daughters with pride. A shaft of amber light spilled through the side window, casting long shadows. The sound of quiet laughter, the clink of metal against wood, and the hush of Maggie's cough formed a fragile melody. An echo of what family meant in a place where so many things had been taken. "I think we can sell these at the flea corner," Maggie said softly, voice. People like things made by small hands. Joni looked up, smirking. That sounds suspicious. June giggled, shaking her head. Maybe don't tell them that part, Mama. Outside, Shiloh's silhouette moved past the window, and Joni's smile faded slightly. She thought of the tunnels, the girl in the photograph, the way her mother had never spoken Ruby's name aloud since she was little. She wasn't sure what scared her more, that Ruby might still be out there, or that she might not. Back at the mine, Elias crouched with his rifle slung across his back. Shiloh trotted ahead of him, ears alert but relaxed, indicating no immediate human scent, only cold air, rust, and old water. The tunnel split after a few yards. One path sloped upward toward collapsed stone. The other dipped sharply and curved into darkness. A faint hum vibrated through the rock, electric, not from a generator, but something smaller. Elias raised a hand to stop the agents behind him. "Battery system," he whispered. "Surveillance rig, maybe?" Mara came up beside him, her brow furrowed. "We move in now." No waiting, her team advanced with careful steps, weapons drawn low. At the far end of the tunnel, a metal door had been fitted into the old rock face. Modern locks installed over century-old hinges. A security camera above it tilted, then froze as Mara's tech disabled it with a remote signal. They breached silently. Inside, they found nothing but traces. Blankets on concrete floors, scraps of plastic wristbands, empty bowls, a woman's shoe, no bodies, no guards, just the chilling confirmation that someone had been held here. Elias ran his hand over the wall, breathing shallow. They moved them. Mara's voice was low. "But not long ago, we'll find where." As they exited the tunnel, the night had grown colder. A thin mist settled along the edges of the mine, like breath held too long. Elias looked back once, just once, and thought he saw a shadow shift in the far recess, but it was gone before he could blink. Shiloh nudged his hand, pressing close. "Good boy," Elias murmured. "We'll find them. All of them." The wind howled through the trees as if mourning the long-buried truths about to be unearthed. Snowflakes began their slow descent over Ash Hollow, softening the hard lines of winter, but doing nothing to quiet the weight that pressed into Elias's chest. The map had led them here. The scents, the trails, the hollow echoes of inhuman quiet, all pointed towards something buried, something sealed. At the edge of the woods, a slope of stone disguised the real entrance. It wasn't built for carts or workers. It was built for secrecy. Shiloh stood at the mouth of the tunnel, tail low, body stiff. He was barking now, not loud but persistent, sharp, urgent. Mara Whitaker, ever composed, crouched beside him, gloved hand resting lightly on his withers. "He's got something." Elias approached from behind, rifle slung over one shoulder, flashlight angled low. The others fanned out in a semi-circle. Their breath plumed in the frigid morning air. "That door," Elias murmured, pointing to a square metal panel built into the rock wall. It wasn't on the original plans. The steel was newer than the mine. A keypad had been scorched, the hinges blackened. Someone had tried to burn their way in or out. Either scenario was sickening. Mara gestured. "Breach it. Quiet." The technician, a lean woman named Callie Dorn, with cropped silver blonde hair and a mouthful of clipped sarcasm, stepped forward. Her fingers worked quickly with the cold metal, inserting a small rig of wires and magnets. Sparks flickered, a whine. Then the door gave a reluctant hiss and eased open. Inside was silence. They entered single file. Shiloh first, then Mara and Elias. The air shifted from cold to stale, thick with mildew and rust. The corridor bent, then widened. And in the center, beneath a single flickering bulb, were three figures huddled under blankets. Two of them flinched. The third did not. The girl in the middle looked up slowly, defiance flickering in her bloodshot eyes. She was perhaps 17 now, tall but too thin, her limbs awkward with half-grown strength. Her hair was dark brown, tangled, but fell in familiar waves over her shoulders. Her cheek was bruised, her lips split. But when she spoke, her voice didn't tremble. "Don't touch them. I'm the one you want." Mara stepped forward carefully, badge visible, voice low and calm. "You're not in trouble. We're here to take you home." The girl's gaze flicked between Mara, Elias, and finally Shiloh, whose head tilted just slightly. "Is this real?" she whispered. "I've had this dream before." It was Elias who knelt. "What's your name?" "Ruby," she said, barely louder than a breath. "Ruby Keene, but they made me call myself Sarah. For years behind her, the two other girls both, younger and older than 13, began to sob. "Help them first," Ruby said. "They're weaker. They worked fast." The medics moved in, blankets wrapped, blood pressures checked. Ruby stood only after ensuring the others were carried out first. Her body shook as she stepped forward. Shiloh came, closer, pressed his muzzle to her thigh. She flinched and then slowly, haltingly reached out to stroke behind his ears. "Is he yours?" she asked Elias. "No," Elias replied. "He's his own." A few yards away, an agent shouted, "We've got movement at the ridge." Caleb Dorn had waited too long. The coward's escape was anything but elegant. A beat-up pickup stashed behind a camouflage tarp, tires half sunk in frozen earth. But he hadn't counted on the outer perimeter or on Shiloh's second bark that triggered Mara's order. Two agents tackled him just as the engine sputtered to life. Caleb hit the ground hard, cursing. He was older now, gray at the temples, face bloated, from years of drink and cowardice. But his eyes still had that smug gleam, the kind Elias remembered from every confrontation in the precinct hallway. Mara knelt beside him, the evidence already in hand, a phone, 3 SIM cards, one of them still warm from his coat, a notebook filled with coded names, a thumb drive with what Elias suspected was worse than anyone wanted to imagine. "I should have buried you deeper," Caleb spat, lips split. "And yet here we are," Elias replied coldly. "Shame your secrets weren't buried with you." That evening, the Keene household held a strange silence. Joni had sat at the windowsill for hours, clutching the little cloth square she'd embroidered. June sat on the floor, petting Shiloh's side absently, her lips moving without sound. Then, headlights flashed outside. The knock came softly. Maggie answered with shaking hands, and Ruby stepped inside. She didn't look like a sister. Not yet. Her face was hollow, eyes haunted, her frame swamped in borrowed clothes. But Maggie stared at her as if her heart had stopped. "It's you," she whispered. "It's really you." Ruby nodded once. "I didn't know if I'd ever see you again." Joni stood slowly, holding the cloth square. 3 embroidered flowers and a new one stitched in the shape of a dog. She offered it silently. Ruby took it. Her fingers trembled. Then she dropped to her knees and hugged Joni tightly, her tears wetting the girl's shoulder. "I waited so long for someone to remember me," Joni whispered back. "We never forgot." The courthouse in Ash Hollow hadn't seen this many people in years. Winter still clung to the edges of the square like a secret unwilling to let go. But inside the heavy stone building, warmth radiated from the tension off finality. Caleb Dorn, once the town sheriff and now a man stripped of all badges and illusions, sat handcuffed at the defense table. He was thinner than before, his once commanding presence hollowed by weeks of exposure and interrogations. His gray hair was disheveled, his eyes a storm of fury on resignation. Judge Miriam Hawthorne presided, an older woman with steel gray hair and a tight bun, and glasses that never seemed to slip. Her voice carried no malice, only weight. "For your crimes of human trafficking, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy, this court sentences you to 45 years in a state penitentiary without parole." Caleb didn't speak. He just stared at Elias, at the girls, at the wall behind them, as if hoping this was a dream. But there was no waking from what he had done. Ruby sat beside Maggie in the front row, one hand on her mother's arm. Maggie's once gaunt frame had filled out with warmth and nourishment. Her cheeks carried color again, and her shoulders no longer slumped as they once did. Elias had helped secure them housing in a small, clean duplex on the east side of town, far from the train tracks, but close to the clinic where Maggie now received long-term care. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd gathered to greet a different kind of hero. Shiloh, the sable-black German shepherd, wore a dark velvet collar bearing a silver badge. He sat patiently as the mayor of Ash Hollow, a tall and soft-spoken man named Gregory Vance, lowered the medal onto his chest. For distinguished service, courage under pressure, and unwavering loyalty, the mayor read aloud, "We present this commendation on behalf of the state's law enforcement division." The crowd clapped. June, now wearing a knit scarf with little red stars, clapped the loudest, her eyes glimmering. Joni whispered to her sister, "We should make him his favorite treat tonight." Ruby knelt beside Shiloh, eyes misting. "You didn't. Just save me. You reminded me how to be brave." Later that afternoon, Ruby walked the length of the community center with calm steps and a steady gaze. The building smelled faintly of fresh paint and chamomile tea. Inside, women sat in chairs with thick cushions and warm blankets. Children played near the window. This center, once run down and overlooked, had become a place of refuge again. Ruby had insisted on volunteering. The coordinator, Carla Monroe, a middle-aged woman with warm brown skin, cropped curls, and a raspy voice shaped by years of chain smoking and court testimony, had been skeptical at first. "You sure you're ready for this?" she had asked. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, sweetheart." But Ruby had only smiled. "I'm not proving anything. I'm just healing in the same direction they are." She spent her days listening. She sat, with women too afraid to meet their own eyes in the mirror. She held children who flinched at footsteps. She brewed tea, folded pamphlets, helped fix a broken chair with a borrowed drill, and slowly she wove herself into the place, thread by steady thread. Back home, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and salt. Maggie had begun baking again, just small batches, just when her hands felt strong enough. Ruby helped knead the dough. June told stories at the table, and Joni started a journal where she kept drawings of everything that had happened since the day near the train tracks. "I think," Joni whispered one night, "that if we write it all down, it won't go away." Ruby hugged her gently. "Even if we don't write it down, it won't go away. But this way we can shape it. We can choose how to remember." On the first warm day of March, when snow gave way to dirt and the air smelled faintly of thawed wood, the three sisters returned to the tracks. The place hadn't changed much. The old siding still peeled from the nearby utility shed. The rails still curved out of sight, humming when the wind caught them just right. But this time, there was no chill of danger, no whisper of fear in the brush. Ruby carried a small apple sapling, its roots bundled in burlap. June brought a small tell, and Joni carried the ribbon, a faded piece of red silk, once part of their mother's dress. They planted the tree together, just a few steps from where they'd first found the rusted box. The soil was stubborn, still stiff from winter, but they worked slowly, their breath coming in short puffs. When the roots were buried and the earth padded firm, Ruby tied the ribbon around the narrow trunk. June looked up. "Do you think it'll survive?" Ruby's voice was soft, but steady. "It will. This place once buried me, but now it's where I begin again." Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or trumpets. They arrive quietly, like a dog leading someone home, a ribbon tied to a sapling, or the silent strength of a girl who chooses to forgive the world that once hurt her. In the darkest places, God still works through the small and the ordinary, through courage, through kindness, and through love that refuses to die. In our own lives, we may not all uncover secret maps or escape hidden prisons, but each of us is called to notice those still trapped in pain, to be the hands that help and the voice that says, "You are not forgotten." If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Leave us a comment. We read each one and subscribe to the channel to stay connected with more stories of resilience, love, and faith. May God bless you and watch over your family wherever you